Okay, guys. Today lecture is about the budget of the European Union. From the very beginning, it was necessary to have a budget. Even in the 50s with the steel and coal community, and then with the economic community, it was required money for the policies. So that's why from the 50s, the European Union has a budget. So just before to start with the budget itself, let me say why is important the budget. Remember that the European Union is an international organization in which the countries or the member states have ceded the competence to the European institutions. So if the European Union have competence, so requires money to provide public goods. So that's why it's very important the general budget. Also remember that the European Union, 19 countries of the European Union share the same currency. In this case, is the euro. So that's why the European Union or some members of the European Union have a monetary union, and also the European Union as a whole has an internal market. So that's why the budget is very, very important. So in the case of public intervention in the economy, is justified by market failure. But what are market failures? The market failure are situations in which the market itself is not working very well. For instance, in the case of pollution, we can talk about market failures because the government and the market is not working very well. So that's why the government have to intervene. And there are many ways to intervene. The classic way to intervene is the regulation. The regulation is mainly laws. The government establishes laws in order to reduce, for instance, in this case, the pollution. And also is required a budget. That budget is necessary to provide the regulation and also to provide some policies. But in any budget, there are taxes. The government obtains resources through taxes. And those taxes are located to provide public goods and services. There are different levels of the let's say in any country, not just the European Union, in any country there are different levels. For instance, in the case of Mexico, we have a federal level, we have a state level, and we have a local level. In the case of the European Union, we have a supranational level, which are located the European institutions, then the national level, for instance, the Spanish national level, the Italian national level, etc. And also the regional level, and that's very important in Europe. For instance, there is a region in Spain that is called the Catalonian, and also the Basque country, in which those countries are regional, but they are like a national in a country. Also in Belgium, they have 3 communities. The northern community is the Flemish community, and also there are in the south, we can talk about the Wallonian community, So there are different levels. Let me say that there are different levels in any country, and also is the same in the case of the European Union. Examples of markers failures, the pollution, in any country there is pollution, and it's a market failure because the market alone cannot solve this problem. It's required the government intervention. And in this case, we have an example, what is a public good. This example is the army. You know, the army is a public good because any person can enjoy or can use, in this case, the security, because there is an army in Mexico and the security that provides the army, I consume the security, doesn't matter if there are another person that are using also the security. So that's why it's army. Another example of public good is like the highways. If you use the highways, I can use the highways and there is no problem. Okay? So let me continue with this. And what are the regulations? There are many kinds of regulation. Basically, when we talk about regulation, we can talk about laws, you know, but we can say regulation like a policy, guidelines, practices, standards, rules, any kind of norm or any kind of law as a whole. The whole you can think about a regulation in a broad perspective. It's like a law, which that law, you can use that law to the coordination of the people. You know, that's are the regulations. So I have already said that there are different levels. In the case of the European Union, we can talk about higher level, which is the European Union, but the intermediate level are the member states, and the lower level are the regions. You know, the European Union, for instance, the Belgium is the intermediate level, and the Flemish region is the lower level. So one question that arises is what competence should be assigned to the different levels of government? You know, it's very different to provide a competence concerning the monetary policy that a competence concerning to pick up the garbage, to collect the garbage, you know? In Mexico, for instance, here in Jalapa, the competence of collect the garbage is located at local level. The army is a national level. In the case of the European Union, also the monetary policy is a supranational level. Collect the garbage is a local level. So the question is how to assign the different competences. So there is a principle that is called subsidiarity that basically says that allocate the competence in higher level just when the lower levels cannot provide it in an optimal level. You know, if, for instance, if monetary policy it cannot be provided at national level, so only in that case it can be provided at supranational level. In other words, just imagine 27 currency in the European Union. If you want to trade, it's better with only one currency. So in that case, it's better that that competence have be provided by the supranational level. But pick up, for instance, the garbage is better to be provided in local level because it's provided at optimal level. Okay, do you have question about that? About subsidiarity? Basically say that only the highest levels will provide the competence only when the lower levels cannot do it. Okay, questions, guys?
No.
No? Okay, let's continue with that. You can see here, truck collect the garbage. That competence is better at local level. Just imagine that the European Union, the European Commission Just imagine that the European Commission had that competence to collect the garbage of all the towns in the European Union. I mean, it's very, very difficult for the European Union to do that. So it's better to do that at local level. But, for instance, the monetary policy is better to supranational level. It's better only one currency than 27 currency, or just imagine one currency per region. You know, it's better only one currency, because with only one currency you can trade a lot. Okay, so let's continue. We have the financial activity take place in 3 different organizations. The first one is the budget, which is the most important, but also we have the European Investment Bank and the European Development Fund. You know, since 1968 there is a single budget. You know, is operative, and the main items are economy and social cohesion and the common agricultural policy. We have already seen what is the common agricultural policy. In the previous class, we already see that the common agricultural policy is money that goes for farmers to produce, and right now it's not only for produce, it's only to produce, but in green way. You know, they have to consider also the environmental issues, the farmer, in order to get more money. Okay, but also we have the let's say the cohesion funds. No, in this case the cohesion funds are mainly for highways, airports, and other kind of infrastructure. You know, that's the money goes specific for these actions. So remember, we have the budget, EU budget, the European Investment Bank, and European Development Fund. The most important is the budget, but also you have to consider the other two. In this case, the European Investment Bank was created in 1958, and the main function is to lend money for investment projects for the poor regions in the European Union. And mainly is for infrastructure and protection of the environment inside of the European Union. And the European Development Fund is outside of the European Union. It's mainly money that goes from Europe to outside, mainly Africa, and is a community policy for cooperation to the less development countries. But remember, it's mainly for Africa. So we have, right now we are in the budgetary process. We have three stages. The first one is the elaboration and the approval. The second one is the execution. And the third one is the control. You know, the first one, that is the preparation and the approval. Basically, the commission is the institution that prepares the preliminary draft budget, and then that draft budget goes to the Council of the European Union and to the Parliament. We can see in this figure how are the stages of the budget. You know, first of all, remember the European Commission is the institution in which the Prime Minister talks about the European interest. So basically that institution set the European Union's policy agenda. They establish the policies agenda. That policy agenda go to the European Commission, and the European Commission establish the draft of the budget. Also, that institution use as inputs the feedback and lobbying of different stakeholders. the public consultation, the citizens, civil society, experts, interest group, and so on. You know? But the thing is that once that the European Commission has a draft, that draft go to the European Parliament and to the European Council, European Union Council. And then there is a process of co-decision between the European Parliament and European Union Council. You know, it's established a process of co-decision. So, and that is the process of co-decision. We have mainly two kinds of expenses. You know, we have an expense that is mandatory expenses and non-mandatory expenses. The mandatory expenses are established in the Treaty of the European Union, and the non-mandatory expenses are sent to the Council. No, that are not really in the Treaty, but there are expenses that are also required by the institution. Okay. So the Council, what can they say? The Council. The proposals for the modification of the mandatory pensions and take the final decision. You know, in the mandatory expenses, the Council takes the final decision. In the case of non-mandatory expenses, send the draft to the Parliament, and then the Parliament can make an amendment, and that amendment can go again to the Council, and then the Council can take the final decision. Or in the case of disagreement, the Parliament may reject the project and request a new one, but only in the case of non-mandatory decision. In the non-mandatory expenses, in the case of non-mandatory expenses, there is a really process of co-decision. In the case of mandatory expenses, the Parliament can make observation, but the final decision is held in the European Union Council or Council of Ministers, as you wish to name that institution. Okay, question about that, guys? Questions? No? Okay.
No, teacher, thanks.
Okay. Mandatory expenses is almost half of the budget. Remember that are included in the treaty and are mainly items that are related with the common agricultural policy. For instance, in this case, are agricultural prices, you know, a structural agricultural policy also is the same in the common agricultural policy, and reimburses to the member states, in particular, the cost of collecting own resources. I mean, almost all these expenses are related with common agricultural policy. Then comes the execution and the control. And in this case, the Commission is which make the execution of the budget, and the control are mainly two institutions involved. One is in the case of external control, the Court of Accounts, and also in the case of external control is the Parliament. You know, those two institutions are in charge of control the budget. Okay, let's go to see some data concerning the budget. You know, this is the budget of 2023, you know, and we can see the categories, you know. The biggest one is related with economy and social territorial cohesion. You know, this light green. This light green is the it's the biggest one. Also with the dark green, you can see is the natural resources and environment, which is mainly the common agricultural policy. You know, the common agricultural policy right now is focusing in green policies. So that's why it's very important those two items, the economy, social and territorial cohesion, and natural resources and environment. You know, and there are other kind of items that are also important. For instance, this is single market innovation and digital, security and defense. And look, in this grade is European public administration. I mean, in this item are included the salaries. You know, it's not really big comparing to all the budget. Okay, in the next slide you can see this is for 2016. It's almost the same for the present, but this is the size of the economy of the European Union. In light green is the size of the economy of the European Union. In the square, light green square is the size of the economy of the European Union. In dark green, in the square dark green, is the public expenditure of the whole European Union. And in the purple is the European Union budget. I mean, it's not really big, but it's very, very important. You know? And this is the average of the EU budget, the size of the EU budget as a percentage of the gross domestic product. You know, it's around 1% of the total size of the European Union economy. Question, you have question about that, guys? It's more from an economical point of view. So if you have question, please just ask me. No question? Okay. So let me continue. These are the expected European Union revenues. You know, you need incomes, you need taxes in order to provide expenses. But let me say in advance that the European Union doesn't have European taxes. There are national taxes. You know, for instance, if you want to export to Germany, you have to pay. I mean, right now the European Union and Mexico have a general agreement, so you can export to the European Union, but you have to pay internal taxes in Germany, for instance, or in Spain, and it's different, the level. You know? In other words, there is no European Union taxes. So the European Union have to collect in different way the taxes or the incomes. You know? The traditional own resources are the tariff. It's the money that collects the European Union. If you want to export something to the European Union, you have to pay the tariff. So in that way, the European Union collects money, but just look, and it's only the 15%. The second item that is also important is the own resources by VAT. The VAT in Mexico is like the Impuesto al Valor Agregado, but it's no VAT, it's not a European VAT, it's a national VAT. So each country collects the VAT in different ways, you know, but it's only the 18%. And finally, other kind of resources are the gross national product, and in this case is 67%. You can see the revenues, and the most important revenues is a percentage of the gross domestic product. In gray, you can see here is the most important. Basically say that if you have a big economy like the German economy, you have to pay more money to Brussels. Here you can see the own resources for the budget 2020. You can see also the most important is G&I own resources. Basically says you have a big economy, you have to pay more. Right now, the countries that pay more to the European Union is Germany, is also France, is also Italy, is also Spain. For instance, Malta is a tiny economy, so doesn't pay a lot. And this very important slide, you can see here all the countries of the European Union send money to Brussels and receive money from Brussels. I mean, for instance, Germany, that is the biggest economy in the European Union, also receive money from Brussels. But here, you can see here, those countries that you can see here are countries that send more money than the money that receive. For instance, in this case, are contributors, net contributors, for instance, Germany, France, the Netherlands, Italy, Sweden, Denmark, Austria, Finland, and Ireland. Those countries are net contributors. And the countries in red are net beneficiaries. You know, for instance, Poland is the country that receives more money from the European Union, but also Greece, Hungary, Romania, Portugal, Belgium, Czech Republic, Luxembourg, Spain. Also, you can see here Spain in the past received a lot of money. That's why Spain have a lot of highways, a lot of airports. Many money in that airports and highways come from European Union funds. You know, you have questions here, guys? You have questions concerning about what are the contributors and the beneficiaries? Let me say that all the countries receive and send money, but we are talking about in net terms, you know? Okay, so let me finish. Let me sum it up. The European Union is small, but it's very important, mainly for countries that for instance, in the case of Greece and in the case of Spain, at the beginning of the 90s, they received a lot of money, and right now it's very important, for instance, for Poland, for instance, for Czech Republic, for instance, for Croatia. They receive money, and this is very, very important. The European Union have approaches to fiscal federalism, you know, the allocation of resources is redistribution and stabilization. The European Union have approaches to fiscal federalism, basically by the provision of a European public goods, and the fiscal policy is far away, is not close. We cannot say that the European Union have a fiscal policy because mainly the European Union doesn't have European taxes, but perhaps in the future. The Parliament and the Council of the European Union play the main roles in the budget.